Hey everybody, Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for GamingTrend.com. Hope you're having a happy holiday. It's the return of the giant purple box, and you know what that means. It's time for the next edition of our Fanhome Iron Man Mark III build. This is episode number 43 through 46. Let's open this thing up and see what's inside. With the boxes all unpacked, we have our 4 usual assembly pieces, but we have 2 more. We have a box up here and this larger box here. Now I'm gonna leave those for last, and obviously you can skip ahead, but let's just save those as a surprise. We're gonna be going through episode number 43, 4, 5, and 6. Let's get rolling. In episode 43, we're gonna be assembling this cover plate that goes over the calf. This is that plate that actuates when Tony fires his repulsors off the back of his legs. So we'll be assembling these pieces for attachment later. The comic is gonna cover Hulkbuster, the second iteration of the Hulkbuster armor. But first, we're gonna touch base with what has to be easily the strangest Iron Man offshoot, and that is a team up with the Fantastic Four in Japan at the land of monsters. So you could call this art style almost a Japanese woodblock style, but it's a really strange look at Iron Man and the team in Japan. Fighting all sorts of monsters. Marvel has traditionally not gone back to this style of, well, certainly not this style of artwork, but having their world's greatest heroes fight against giant monsters and kaiju of any kind, it's really just not been a thing. You do have some creatures like Fin Fang Foom that, I mean, it would be really hard to pry that into a serious movie, having somebody actually say that out loud and, you know, with a serious look on their face. It's gonna be a challenge to get some of these more classic characters and offshoots into the MCU, if that ever happens. But this particular offshoot has Iron Man teaming up with the Fantastic Four. And unfortunately, the artist passed away not too long after this series was completed. So this is definitely a one and done, and I imagine because of that artist passing away, Marvel was never really all that interested in trying to retread that ground, so this is a one and done. It's certainly an interesting look at one of Tony's more interesting adventures outside of his normal canon. Certainly worth a look. If there's one thing that drives comic book fans completely insane, it's the way that the MCU messes with their characters and their timelines, and we see both in the Mighty Avengers. So in this comic run, we have the end of the superhero civil war. Tony has decided to reform the Avengers with a completely new set of characters. He wants people that will be a symbol of hope to the world, and who better to start with than Miss Marvel herself. From there, he needs a combat veteran, so he brings in Janet Van Dyne, better known as the Wasp, and then we see a bit of a split. He also brings in Sentry. Sentry is a character we've not seen in the MCU, and Sentry has very similar power, at least capabilities, as Wanda. So she would be almost Wanda's mirror in terms of ability to face off. From there, in the absence of Thor, he wanted to bring in somebody with, again, an equivalent level of power. And to celebrate God of War Ragnarok, which you can see that hammer there in the background, he brings in Ares, the God of War. So it's an interesting look at the Avengers with a completely new set of characters that, some of which we haven't even seen on the big screen. So this is an interesting one if you've only seen the MCU and you want to jump in on a really cool kind of side adventure. The Mighty Avengers is a really cool one to start with. One of the things that we see tweaked slightly, but still very much tied to the MCU, is the way that Tony feels about the Hulk. Now, he still sees Bruce's transformation into the Hulk as this global threat, and as such, he's built this second Hulkbuster armor. He wants to weed out the things that allowed the Hulk to defeat him in that armor previously. So, as such, the purpose for needing this is they kind of did it to themselves. Tony, along with Black Bolt, Doctor Strange, and Reed Richards, have basically banished Bruce to space and to this world that's just full of monsters. And unfortunately, instead of killing him, which is probably the kind of unwritten intent, he becomes even stronger. In fact, he takes on a new moniker called the Destroyer of Worlds. That's not exactly going to make Tony feel any better, and as such, the next time that they engage, he's in this new Hulkbuster 2 armor. Now, this armor has a lot of different improvements that Tony's put in place to, as I said, kind of paper over the weaknesses of the previous one. Like the helmet can't be removed, one of the primary things that got Tony in trouble. It also has injectors that can counter the gamma radiation in the Hulk. But what Tony finds out is that this is still largely insufficient because the Hulk's power doesn't come from just his mutations, but also his just interminable rage. And as such, he ends up dropping Stark Tower directly on top of the Hulkbuster 2 armor, completely defeating Tony, which a valuable and if not painful lesson. So it's a cool read, and it's nice to see Tony actually take an L every once in a while. The piece that we're going to be assembling, as I mentioned, is the left leg thruster cover. So I've got that pulled aside here. I'm going to get everything pulled out and get these screws out of the bag, and I'll be right back. There isn't a great deal to assemble here. What we're actually doing is putting together the calf hinge. So you can see there's a small hole here and its corresponding connection point right there. Following the picture here, all we're doing is mating those two up and dropping in a screw. So let's do that first. Looks like we're going to be putting in a LP screw. It's one of those moments where 3 hands would be helpful. At least a magnetic screwdriver is nice. I know I say this often, but it is really nice to see that the Fanhome team continues to include a spare screw of every type. Off camera here, I have a box that I keep all the spares in, just in case. You never know when you drop one of these tiny screws and it's just gone to Narnia or wherever, like I just did here. I don't know where those go, but wherever they're off to, sometimes you just can't find them. So having an extra at hand keeps the build moving, and that's a really nice touch. I really appreciate that. I don't know how much it costs, but I really do sincerely appreciate it. All right, that's one side. Grab the other side, do the same thing. LP on both sides. The second one should be remarkably easier. We don't really need these to be super tight. They should still move freely. But I believe I have just done it upside down. Nope, there we go. Okay, whew. I was worried there for a minute. All right, so yeah, we're matching the picture exactly here. So now that the hinge is assembled, it freely rotates, which ultimately I imagine it's going to end up being mounted probably like so in the next thing. So I want to make sure that that clearance is good, that can move, and it looks like it folds completely flat. So just a quick preview, let's see. Number 2, yep, looks like we're doing exactly that. So sorry for spoiling the surprise. So we're going to take this metal, I love that these are metal. We're going to take this metal plate here and we're going to mount this in. Again, this is one of those little things that other model makers just skip out on. So you got these posts, but you also have these holes, so you kind of know exactly where they go. You know that it's going to go right there, and I think the correct word is chamfered. Either way, they're drilled out, so you know exactly where the screw is going to go, and it makes it really easy to align that and drop it in place. So we're going to use EM screws to do exactly that, and that will be the end of the assembly for this round. See, that was so easy because they gave us all of that extra drilling. Again, it probably cost them tenths of cents, but man, it saves so much time for assembly and makes this so much easier. I really do appreciate it. So we'll get those not quite snug. Make sure everything still moves as it should, which it does. So now we'll lock those in so they stay put, and that will do it for this 43rd episode. Boom, just like that. We will set it with our other pieces, and then we'll jump into 44. All right, buckle up, folks. I know I've said that more than once, but this is going to be a weird one. So we're going to be talking about the Ultimate Iron Man, kind of a reboot of Iron Man, as well as Rescue, which is an armor that we briefly saw in Iron Man 3, as well as assembling another piece of the Mark III's leg. Let's crack it open and see what's what. Now, I don't normally do this. I normally only do this when it gets real weird, but I'm just going to read this verbatim. Ready? Here we go. Iron Man was given an alternative debut and origin story in the popular Ultimate series, which was created by Mark Millar and Brian Hitch. Many years ago, Howard Stark was a businessman, a great tech entrepreneur, and above all, a futurist. One of his lines of research focused on the development of a bio-body armor. This protection functioned as a second skin. It was resistant as diamond, but could also be removed with water. Its basic principle was biological. It was made up of bacteria that would live on human skin. On suffering any impact, the bacteria act as parasites, spreading like piranhas and consuming any type of metal used as a projectile, ending the threat. The skin is colored blue, but has one major drawback. In the absence of an external threat, after 3 hours, the bacteria ends up consuming the wearer's skin to survive. To solve this problem, Howard Stark hired Maria Carrera, an expert biologist in regeneration and body regrowth. They did not know that they would end up falling in love and having a son, Tony Stark. In a laboratory accident, Dr. Carrera is bitten by a monkey that has been inoculated with a virus for the regeneration of limbs. At the time of the accident, Maria was pregnant, although she did not yet know it. In monkeys, this virus, in addition to regenerating the limbs, has a side effect. It also regenerated the brain, constantly creating organic tissue and expanding the brain beyond the capacity of the skull. This virus is designed for monkeys, and the effect it could have on humans, let alone embryos, was unknown. So there you go, Tony Stark, part monkey. So, this alternative look at Tony Stark, it's really, I know it's got the weirdness of having the mutations in monkeys and regenerating limbs and expanding brains and all that stuff. That's not really what this comic series is about. This is really more, how do I break free of all of the trappings of having a comic that has spanned multiple decades? Technology moves very quickly, and a lot of what Tony is capable of is very much rooted in the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s. So this is an opportunity to kind of reboot Tony and give him a completely new, non-Mad Men, if you will, storyline, and allows them to really take advantage of nanotechnology and other emerging technologies that Tony could have been a part of pioneering. And how can we rebuild Tony in a way that he isn't so much of a broken kid with daddy issues? And so it's a really interesting look at a reboot. Even though you're going to see very familiar faces and names, you're going to see Zebediah Stane, you're going to see the Baxter Group, you're going to see obviously Tony's parents. So there's a lot of things that are kind of intermeshed and crossed over, but it's a cool way to reboot Tony as a character, even though it really wasn't ultimately all that successful. So we're going to take a look at the Mark III armor's left leg again, assembling some more, looks like some cosmetic pieces. And that actually looks like a complete leg. I'm excited. And then we're going to jump into Secret Invasion. If you're worried about spoilers for the next MCU phase, if my theories are correct, it's probably going to have a little bit of something to do with this. Now, we've discussed multiple times that the MCU loves to take at least pieces of the comics and then run with them in a completely different direction. So I might be completely off base, but in the Secret Invasion, it talks a lot about kind of the aftermath of the Kree-Skrull War. So if my theory is correct, we're going to find out that Nick Fury hasn't actually been on Earth for quite some time. He's actually been off with Ms. Marvel fighting a whole different war that we're completely unaware of. And that's really what this particular series is about. It's heading to the Savage Land. There's quite a few heroes that are going to get introduced that we have not seen in the MCU yet, and quite a few that we have. Obviously we've got some of the MCU characters that have had their own shows, including a few that we might see in future crossovers. So there's a lot of potential for kind of the unification of the Fox properties, the Sony properties, and the Marvel properties all brought together for one crazy Avengers-like movie we've got some of those on the horizon. So if you want to learn about all the kind of the fights between the Kree, the Skrull, and how the denizens of the Marvel MCU end up kind of plugged into that, here's your look at it. Part of that look is also the Watcher. So if you watched What If, then you know that the Watcher is now kind of involved in the MCU, and we have other characters like Galactus and other kind of global threats that are well beyond just the personal stakes of, you know, is this person a Skrull? Is this person not a Skrull? You know, how is this shadowy cabal all coming together? It should be at least rife for some truly insane twists, you know, when we find out, you know, oh hey, Bucky was really this Skrull person all along or whatever. It should be interesting to see how the team takes what the comics have established here, which is just kind of a cacophony of the world's best heroes banging together to create chaos, and seeing it come to life on the screen. So the reason I'm not reading this or really going into the details is there's just so much, and even this portion of this book from Fanhome doesn't even scratch the surface. So it'd almost be wasteful, and I'd spend twice the length of this entire video just trying to explain just this one segment of the comics. So if you're interested in kind of where things might be going, well, Secret Invasion might be the way to go. So let's flip back to that assembly right after we talk about Rescue. Say what you will about Iron Man 3, we at least got to see a lot of really cool armors, and one of them was briefly Rescue, even though I'm not sure they even ever referred to it as Rescue. But Rescue is an armor that Tony had built specifically for Pepper. It's not meant to be an offensive armor, although it's not completely without weaponry either. But it's meant to be this thing that can rescue Pepper from danger, but ultimately she's not interested in being a damsel in distress. So she ends up using Rescue far more than Tony had anticipated, and in ways that he probably had no intention of her using it, including joining him on a few missions here and there. So if you're interested in a really cool armor set that we just got criminally passed over in the movies, check out Rescue. I went ahead and pulled the left leg and pulled everything out of the box. Just a word of caution, if ever these videos stop, it's because I've either been killed by cellophane or double-sided backing paper. I don't know why, but I just struggle with these. You've probably seen that in previous iterations of this very show, but here we go again. We're gonna remove the backing paper from one side of the adhesive. Figures that I just trimmed my nails, so we'll see how well that goes. Oh, looks like success. We're gonna stick that right here, I guess. Figures I didn't do it quite straight, but it's gonna be not just good, but good enough. It says to remove the other side as well, so, all right. Yeah, that went better than expected. All right, so one sticky side of tape there. I'm not sure where that's gonna go, but that is ready. Retrieve the assembly from the issue 42, voila. And looks like this is gonna go onto the front of the shin somewhere. Let's see. Place the upper leg plate, 44C, that's this, onto the front of the limb as shown. Right, to do this, open the sides of the piece a little so that it snaps into position. The two posts inside 44C fit into the holes on the left shin guard 39A. All right, so I guess that's gonna go right here. That sticky is gonna hold it in place. These little posts that you can see right here are gonna kind of snap in, and it's all gonna get screwed in up there. So I'm gonna kind of slip this in like that. Push those posts on. There we go. That wasn't hard at all. That just seemed more complicated than it was. I guess the sticky is just to keep everything from sliding while you get everything inside. pressed on. So those posts are on, that's not going anywhere. That was easy. All right. Secure the upper leg plate 44C with 2 EM screws, 1 on each side. No surprise there. That's going to be the larger of these 2 holes here. That one's locked in. That one's also locked in, and 1 shin, all done. Next, looks like we're going to cover these side plates. Those should just be pushed on. 2 little posts here, one slightly longer than the other. Really only one way these can go, he says as he messes them up. All right, come back here. There we go. So the posts will just pop on, just like so. Press in place, done. Give those a squeeze. And that's it for this one. Super easy assembly. This leg piece looks pretty much complete. There's probably going to be 1 or 2 more pieces to assemble here, and then that leg piece is going to be entirely complete as well. I'm sure we're going to be attaching this calf plate in the next episode, but join me in just a minute and we'll do exactly that. So 45 is going to be a fun one. There's going to be some spoilers, but I'm going to try and be as light as I can. If you've not watched What If and you don't want the area around some characters spoiled, I will let you know when to skip. And if you've not watched the trailers for Ant-Man Quantumania, there might be some spoilers in there as well. But this focuses on the Young Avengers. So the Young Avengers definitely look like they could be the young kids of the various Avengers. Specifically, we have Iron Lad, who looks not unlike Tony and also has a set of armor that's very similar. We have Asgardian, who definitely looks like he could be Thor's kid. Patriot definitely looks like he could be Steve Rogers' kid. And then we have Hulkling. I mean, even the name suggests that he's Hulk's kid. But surprisingly, they're not. So this is one of those spoiler moments. If you want to skip, now's the time. At the end of What If, we're introduced to a character named Kang the Conqueror. And Kang is this omniscient being that is really kind of the man behind the man behind the man behind the curtain. So he is effectively pulling all these strings that are making all these things happen. And he's probably going to be the kind of extinction level event that the Avengers are going to have to deal with in some of those latter movies that are on the slate. Here we see him as a young man, and he's basically masquerading as this Iron Patriot person, and Iron Lad person who just wants to just be a kid and not be Kang the Conqueror. And he does realize that he's a time traveler and he has a responsibility, but he doesn't really want to become that other person. And he's working with other familiar faces. So we see Kate Bishop, which Kate Bishop was obviously part of the Hawkeye show on Disney+. And then we also have Cassie Lang, who is the daughter of Ant-Man. And we see in Quantumania, she's also going to be joining that team. I'm not going to ruin that for you, but we see her as part of this team. There's some more time travel shenanigans, as there often is, but what we find is kind of the third act noble sacrifice that Kang ends up having to save the day, become this monstrous Kang the Conqueror. So it's an interesting redemption arc. Even if they don't use all the parts of it, we can see little pieces that might end up coming up in some of the movies that are coming up later. So it's a cool little nod, and it'll be a fun one to read. We're going to be assembling the right foot. We obviously have the left foot already built, so this is going to be much a repeat of the previous work, including adding the repulsor at the bottom to make it all light up. But first, we're going to talk about Wolverine. For as much as Wolverine comes up in Iron Man's story, you'd think this is an easy crossover. These are properties that belong together. But in the real world, we have these things called contracts held by people called lawyers. And unfortunately, back when Marvel wasn't making very much money, they had split the universe. So the X-Men and the Fantastic Four went over to Fox, and pretty much the remainder all stuck with Marvel. So on the Marvel side, you have characters like Iron Man and Captain America and Miss Marvel, and obviously you have the characters I just mentioned on the Fox side, but also add Spider-Man to that list. So through, I'm sure, inexhaustible amounts of negotiations, we now see Iron Man join up with Spider-Man, but that X-Men crossover just doesn't happen. This particular section, now that Disney owns all of it, might actually happen. So this is really kind of the playground conversation that we all had as kids. Could Wolverine beat Iron Man? Could adamantium cut through Iron Man's armor? And by extension, could Wolverine actually beat T'Challa? Could it cut through the vibranium armor of the Black Panther? So this is really that what if scenario. If they can come up with a good reason for, as it was referred to in the movies, Shakespeare in the Park and Tony to fight, I'm sure they're going to come up with a reason for Tony and Wolverine to square off when they eventually do hit the silver screen. So this is kind of that what if scenario, and it's a fun one. It turns out, depending on which one you read, the answer is yes. As I just mentioned, one of the properties that Sony had held on to was Spider-Man, and that includes Norman Osborn. So in the comics, Tony's obviously got a big problem with Norman Osborn. He's this massive threat to Tony, both in the business world and as Green Goblin. Obviously, he is a huge threat against Tony when he's Iron Man. So to combat Norman, either through acquisition or through force from obtaining any of Tony's secrets to his weapons and his armor, he actually deletes all copies of any of the information about his armor and about his weapons, including his own memory. But to ensure that he can continue to be able to be Iron Man, this is where we see really the introduction of nanomachines. And we see a little bit of this in Iron Man 3, and we see a little bit of this in the Avengers movies, where we're starting to see more nano-based machines, and that's really this bleeding edge armor that you see here. So this is where Tony doesn't require a metal plate suit attached to him like the suitcase armor. This is something that can come from within him, and it can be a part of him. So it's really Tony's kind of transition to being post-human. Not really a man or a machine, but both together, and not just a man in a machine, but man as machine. So it's a cool transition, and certainly one that I'm sure that the original creators had no thought in their head about ever crossing, but that's where we are with modern Iron Man, and it's kind of cool to see. Even if they do use it as a little bit of a magic get out of jail free card a little too occasionally. As I mentioned, for the assembly of this right foot, we're in very familiar territory, so I wouldn't blame you if you skipped. But if you'd like the refresher, we're basically going to be taking this crossbar assembly, putting it in the center here so it can articulate, which we see the final form of that here, and also putting the repulsor into the bottom of the panel here, covering that and exposing that button so we can turn the repulsor on and off. In a later episode, actually the next one, we're going to be assembling the bottom part of that foot, but we're going to blitz through this pretty quick. All right, so for this next part, we're going to be putting in the electronics, and I want to show once again, but certainly a little closer than I have in the past, just how easy they've made this. So this can be daunting. If you're unsure where to put things, or you don't want to just cram things in there, you don't want to break a wire, I mean, you don't want to create problems where there are none, right? That's where Fanhome really shines, and certainly above most other manufacturers that I've seen. So this little push button has to go through where we can actuate it from the top. Now, I'm going to show you up close. There's this kind of wall here. There's a mount spot there, there's a post there, and a post there, and there's a little bit of a groove right here. That's where this L shape goes. So I'm going to put these two together like so, and that slips right into place, and It's not mounted there, but it does stay there. It'll get mounted when we actually do another piece later, but I'm gonna hold that with this finger while I show the other piece. So this is the case for the battery. And you can see there's a mount point here. I'm kind of touching it with my thumb. That's gonna end up here, but you can't put this in wrong. You just can't. It won't allow you to. It won't fit any other way. So we're gonna kind of align that hole and just drop it in place. And you'll see that what it's done, I'm trying to move things out of the way, this little post is now holding that button in place, and that screw hole is ready for me to drop a screw in there to hold it all from moving. So that's exactly what we're gonna do. That fully locked in, we can now actuate that button. And I'm gonna move this close to it where you can hear it. You've got a nice satisfying clicky sound. So these we're just gonna slide out of the way because we're not gonna be using them until the next assembly, which we'll do in the next episode, but we'll just tuck those away nice and safe. Same thing with this. We're not gonna be putting that on until the next episode, but here's where the battery is gonna go, and then this case is gonna go on top. Again, you can't mess it up. There's a small notch for you to lock in place so it closes. Love the way they've set this up. There's a lot of engineering that went into this, and it just continues to impress me. So join me as we take a look at 46, and now we're gonna open up what's in the white boxes. In our final episode for this week, episode 46, we're gonna tread some familiar territory. We're gonna take a look at the Phoenix Slayer, but first, Tony continues to let the cat out of the bag. He frequently tells the public that he's Iron Man and has to suffer the consequences of that action. In other alternate universes, we've seen him keep it a secret or live a dual life, but there's always trade-offs. So in the current canon, he's revealed himself to the public as both Iron Man and Tony Stark. And in this episode, The Genie Out of the Lamp, we see the repercussions of that. So Tony continues to have issues with arms trading going on behind his back, or enemies just showing up and continuing to harass him and the ones that he loves. And we see that with a familiar character and one that's not so familiar. We see Ghost, a character that we have seen in the Ant-Man movie, but we also see a character named the Living Laser. And the Living Laser is literally light manifest. So Tony has to devise a way for his suit to be able to absorb the living laser in his kind of photonic format, and then pull him into the suit, and then devise another way to store this, well, living weapon. And it's not really the story of Ghost or even the living weapon, but Tony's struggle with, he constantly has these phantasms from his past. His defeated foes continue to come back and constantly just wreak havoc on his life. So he's starting to see just how tough it is to really live a life where he's a hero, because that means that any other life that he had now suffers for it. So it's a more deep and introspective look. Yeah, he's fighting against characters like Ghost and the living weapon, but as usual, the real struggle is within. In this sequence, we're going to finish completing the right foot, which includes loading the repulsor and also sealing that bottom of the foot. So we're going to take this piece and attach the LED screen to the bottom. This is interchangeable, so no need to worry about messing it up. It simply sits in there, and then we're going to put this cap over the top of it to hold it in place. Now that's got a small hole in the center. That's where that LED is going to go so it can shine through. We're going to lock that down with, looks like some AM screws. To ensure nothing gets damaged, I went ahead and tucked that circuit board down inside there and kind of routed the wiring so everything will stay out of the way of any screws. And obviously, next thing we're going to do is lock this LED into that diffusion port and align this post and that post. Everything should just snap together. just like that. So then we'll drop the, let's see, EM screw, I think. Yep, EM screw in there and lock it in place. And the second screw, obviously right here. And then this foot is done. Now to make sure that nothing gets stuck or runs into anything, I've taken this wiring loom and kind of stretched it out here. And I'm just making sure that it's going to clear that post and that post, because that's exactly where this is going to connect. So first things first, we're going to plug in that LED. Then the large post goes towards the top. We're clearing all of the wires here in the back. So it should sit nice and snug, and it's not cutting off any wires or pinching anything. So from there, you simply drop in a pair of EM screws. And that is the main part of the front of the foot. We'll obviously be adding the actuating part here in another video, but I guess to be the back part of the foot is now assembled. We're going to check the ankle can still move, which is good. It should be relatively tight, but not so much that it actually won't actuate. And that's that. That is complete. Now, they're not telling us to put in the battery and test it, but I really would hate to move on without doing that. So I'm gonna go ahead and, actually, no, I'm not. That's just a spacer, so no battery test right now. They're gonna hold that, that battery until they actually want you to test it. So we're gonna set the foot aside along with this cover, and then we're gonna take a look at what's in these white boxes. So just one second. Now we've gotten some cool stuff as we've gone along. We've gotten an Iron Man shirt and an Iron Man hat. Here comes something else pretty cool. One Iron Man power bank. So if you ever wanted to charge with a officially themed Iron Man power bank, there you go. Pretty cool stuff. I wish it was USB-C, but hey, what can you do? And it's nice that it's included. We'll set that aside. And then you've probably guessed that this is the stand. It's starting to give you a sense of scale of just how big this is going to be when we're done. So I'm going to take this out of the box because that squeaking sound on camera is going to suck. So one second. So out of the box, you can see we have at least the first part of the stand. Now this is metal. This is the sort of quality that I would expect on something that's going to be this amazing. And you can start to get a sense of just how big this statue is really going to be when it's complete. In this video here though, what we're going to be doing is assembling the lighting portion. There really isn't a lot to this. There's going to be one button to turn everything on, I would imagine, and then a circuit board to control all the various lights that are going to go into this device. And that's about it. It's a small little nub here. I'll have to figure out where that goes. I imagine it just plugs one of these holes, and then we're done. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this together really quick, and then we'll call it done for the day. So the primary thing that we're gonna be assembling here is really this button assembly. So this button here, it's not actually gonna look like a button, is going to sit on top of this little actuator. So we can just push on that to light up the entirety of the base. And that's gonna go here. First, we need to lock it in place with this. So this is just gonna sit kind of at an L like that. Perhaps on this side, might be the other side. And that's just gonna sit like that. We're gonna mount it down over this. And then we're gonna have that button sitting in there. So first thing, we're gonna put this in place. There's a small flat there, just like there is here. So that's just gonna sit, kind of push there, so it's transparent. You can see it, so you can keep track of it, but it doesn't stick out in so much. Here we're going to need 2 EM screws, and we're going to lock this down like so. I have to kind of balance that. That doesn't really want to stay. Or I've got it backwards again. It's a very distinct possibility. I don't think either side really matters. As long as it's in the hole and it's locked down, that's really the intent. Either way, it's going to be another one of those things where it feels like you need 3 hands to do this. Thankfully, there haven't been that many. This is one of them. All right, now that it's snug, we'll want to make sure we can actuate it, which it feels like it's actuating, so that's good. We'll be able to turn that on and off with ease. The last piece is locking down this printed circuit board. It wants you to align the G and the H to the bottom here, or this inner circle. From there, it's dropping screws in here and then connecting it. Nothing really exciting going on here. And without some lights to test, it's just going to be this part, at least for now. The only thing left to do is plug in the lead. It can only go in one way. There is a button indicator here. It says HS. I'm assuming that stands for hot stuff. So align the little peg here with hot stuff and drops right in place. Make sure it's snug and make sure that the wires aren't in any way being pinched, but that's it. One more quick check. We're good to go. So that concludes this episode. We have completed a little bit more of the leg, and we also picked up this cool charger and the start of the stand. So join me in another 2 weeks and we will continue on our journey to create the Mark I. I'm Ron Burke, editor-in-chief for GamingTrend.com. Thanks for joining, and leave us a comment. Are you joining us for this build? I appreciate you. Stay safe out there, and we'll see you again very soon.